116 square kilometers. That's how much ground Russia's army lost in April 2026. Not gained, lost. For the first time in almost 3 years, one of the largest militaries on Earth gave up more land in a single month than it took. Putin's promised spring offensive, the great steamroller that was supposed to decide the war in 2026, it never really began. It ran into the sand before it ever picked up speed. And here's where it gets strange. Because while Russian soldiers stood still on the ground, something else kept growing the map. On the official maps coming out of Moscow, the Russian army is advancing village by village, kilometer by kilometer, an unstoppable march to the west. Two pictures of the same war. In one, Russia is standing still. In the other, it's winning. Both can't be true. And the question that's rewriting this entire war right now isn't why Putin's offensive failed. We'll get to that in a moment. The question is, what has Moscow been doing since then to hide that defeat, and why now, this summer of all times? Because this isn't one story. It's five reports from 5 different fronts. On their own, they barely make sense. Put together, they form a single picture. Stay with me. Once you've seen it, you won't be able to unsee it. To understand what's happening here, we need to take a step back away from the single Frontline report toward the whole map. It's the summer of 2026. The war in Ukraine is entering its 4th year. 4 years of trenches, drones, and ruined cities. And for the first time in a long while, the arrow no longer points in just one direction. For years, the story ran the same way. Russia presses slowly, bloodily, meter by meter. Ukraine holds, gives ground holds again. The map turned red, always only red. Anyone following the war through headlines alone knew a single pattern: Russia comes, Ukraine yields. In 2026, that pattern flipped. And to see just how much one single image helps, keep it in your mind until the end, because this whole video revolves around nothing else. Imagine that 2 maps hang over this war. The first is made of stone. It shows where soldiers actually stand, where the trenches run, which village was in whose hands this morning. This map doesn't lie. It can't lie. It is the ground itself. The second map is made of paint. It gets painted. In press conferences, in general staffs, and TV studios. On this map, the army advances exactly as far as someone needs it to advance. As long as a war is running, these 2 maps usually line up. Whoever truly advances can also report it. The painted map is then just a copy of the stone one. But in 2026, they broke apart. The stone map is shrinking. The painted map is growing. And in exactly that gap between the real ground and the painted line is where the real story of this summer plays out. Why is Moscow doing this? Why would an army paint an advance that doesn't exist on the field? An army doesn't burn its credibility for no reason. The answer has a name and a date, and the date is June. Because hanging over everything that happens at the front is a clock. According to Ukrainian President Zelensky, the United States has set Ukraine and Russia a deadline. By June 2026, there should be a deal that ends this nearly 4-year war. And a peace deal isn't a game with equal cards. It's a trade where each side brings in what it controls on the ground. Whoever holds more land gets more at the table. Whoever advances dictates. Whoever stands still negotiates from weakness. Land becomes bargaining chips, and bargaining chips become peace or a dictate. This front is about 1,200 kilometers long, longer than the drive from Berlin to Paris. Every square kilometer on that line is a coin in June, a coin you pay with. Whoever can show the most coins sets the price of peace. And that's exactly why it suddenly matters, not just who really advances, but who can credibly claim to be advancing. The war is shifting from the battlefield onto the map itself, and this is exactly where the painted map becomes a weapon. If Russia's real advance is stopped, if the stone map is shrinking, then the painted map is the only thing Moscow can still carry to the negotiating table. An invented victory meant to cost a real price. That's the thesis of this video, and I'll tell you plainly where the hard fact ends and my reading begins. The facts are, Russia's offensive has stalled, and Ukraine is taking ground back. The data suggests that Moscow is systematically exaggerating its territorial gains. And here's my bet: the reason for that lies not at the front, but at the negotiating table in June. Keep the two maps in your head. We'll come back to them at the end. Now let's put the 5 pieces together, one after another. Part 1. The Spark. In February 2026, Ukraine launched something it hadn't dared in a long time, a counterattack. Not everywhere targeted in the south on the border of the Pokrovsk region. The goal was twofold: push Russian troops back and choke off Putin's planned spring offensive before it could start. According to Reuters, after just 1 week of fighting, Ukraine achieved its largest territorial gain since June 2023. President Zelensky told the news agency AFP that his army had retaken roughly 300 square kilometers on the southern front. June 2023. That's a date with weight. That's when Ukraine launched its big, long-anticipated counteroffensive, the one that bogged down in grinding fighting. Since then, Kyiv had never again gained so much ground at once. Until that 1 week in February 2026. Let that number sink in. For 3 years, Ukraine was the side that gave ground. In that 1 week, it was the side that advanced. That's the spark. Remember it because everything else follows from it. Part 2. The proof that it was real. One good day doesn't make a turning point. An army can get lucky once, so let's see whether the spark held. As Al Jazeera reported on March 11th, Russia's presence in the Dnipropetrovsk region shrank to just 3 towns. Almost the entire Dnipropetrovsk region had been liberated, said Ukrainian Major General Oleksandr Komarenko. And right next door, in the Zaporizhzhia region, where Russia once controlled nearly 3/4 of the territory, Ukraine had retaken 9 towns since January. 9 towns in a matter of weeks. Think about what Zaporizhzhia once was: a symbol of Russian conquest, a region where Moscow held 3 out of every 4 square kilometers. The fact that Ukraine is now clawing it back town by town isn't just a tactical success. It's the reversal of a story that for years ran in only one direction. This is no longer a lucky hit. This is a direction. The spark of February had become a wildfire by March. Part 3. The Verdict. When Ukrainians say they're winning, that's one thing. When neutral observers confirm it, that's something else entirely. In war, the first question is always, who's claiming this? And how would they know? This is where the Institute for the Study of War comes in, and a U.S. research institute that tracks this war day by day with satellite imagery and geolocated videos, village by village. It doesn't count what generals say. It counts what can be proven. If anyone knows where the lines truly run, it's them. And the ISW reached a clear conclusion: Ukraine's counterattacks in the south could derail Russia's offensive plans for the spring and summer of 2026. Russia's forces, the Institute said, were struggling to sustain their attacks at all and simply lacked the strength to break through Ukrainian lines. Despite everything Putin promises in public. Let's hold on to that. It's not Ukraine claiming Russia's offensive is finished. A neutral institute is saying it with evidence. That's a difference like day and night. In an information war, the source is half the truth. Part 4. The Smoking Gun. And now the number we started with. According to the Sufan Center, an analysis center specializing in security questions, Russia's daily rate of advance collapsed sharply in 2026. For the first time since the 2023 counteroffensive, Ukraine gained more ground than it lost during certain stretches. And in April 2026, Russia posted a net loss of 116 square kilometers. Read that again. The attacking side lost ground on net over an entire month. It's as if the hammer suddenly recoiled off the nail. How could that happen? One word: drones. The ISW and the Sufan Center see the turning point in the fact that Ukraine regained what's technically called overall drone superiority. In plain terms, thousands of small, cheap drones now swarm over the battlefield, hunting anything that moves tanks, trucks, individual soldiers. Whoever controls the sky over the first few kilometers of the front controls whether anyone can move across open ground at all. That's exactly what brought Russia's advance to a halt. And here lies the key to all of 2026. It wasn't a new wonder weapon, no Western cruise missile that brought the turn. It was thousands of cheap plastic drones that together bolted the sky shut. Russia's mass for years, its greatest advantage, suddenly became its greatest weakness, because mass that can't move is just a bigger target. That's the stone map, and it's shrinking. Part 5. The Hollow Victory. Now, I have to be honest, even when it doesn't fit Ukraine's picture, because Russia did in fact capture something in 2026. Anyone who hides that is painting a map of their own. After months of siege, Pokrovsk is considered fallen, a logistics hub in the Donbass, a junction through which Ukrainian supplies for the Eastern Front ran for a long time. Russian troops pushed into the city as early as November 2025. In early 2026, they took Pokrovsk and the neighboring town of Myrnohrad. That was a real loss for Ukraine, and Pokrovsk was no ordinary place. Supplies for a large part of Ukraine's eastern front ran over its roads and its rail line. Whoever holds Pokrovsk should in theory push open the door to several more cities. It was meant to be a springboard, not a dead end. But here comes the part that explains everything. Russia could make nothing of that victory. According to the available reports, there has been no significant Russian advance westward since December 2025. The city fell, and then the front stopped, and it's still standing today. On June 10th, the Ukrainian agency Ukrinform reported 196 clashes along the entire front. In a single day, the most of them 37 attacks in the Pokrovsk sector. Russia throws everything at this one point and doesn't gain a single step. A captured city that became a dead end. That's not a breakthrough. That's exhaustion with a flag stuck on top. Part 6, the painted map. And here the circle closes. Because what does an army do when it can no longer advance but has to look victorious? It paints. The ISW compared Russia's success reports with the real ground and found a gap that can no longer be explained away. In the north, in the Kharkiv region around the ruined border town of Vovchinsk, long since dubbed the Bakhmut of the North by observers because it's being ground down house by house, the Russian general Rudskoy claimed to have captured a certain number of settlements. The ISW found evidence for exactly half 7 instead of the number claimed. And this is no isolated case. Across all of Ukraine, since the start of 2026, the ISW could verify the capture of 19 settlements and 572 square kilometers. Rudskoy's claim was 42 settlements and 900 square kilometers, nearly double. Out of thin air. That's the painted map cast in numbers. Translated, it means more than 300 square kilometers that Moscow claims for itself exist only on its own map. An entire stretch of land bigger than some cities, simply asserted. Let's pause for a moment and look at the whole. 6 reports a Ukrainian counterattack in the south liberated towns in 2 regions, a neutral verdict on Russia's failed offensive, a monthly loss of 116 square kilometers, a captured city that became a dead end, and a Russian map painted nearly twice as large as the ground it stands on. On their own, they're 5 shrugs. Together, they're a confession the side that's supposedly winning has to invent its victory. But why do these pieces add up to something greater than their sum? Why is an exaggerated map more dangerous than a lost village four mechanics interlock? Let's take them in order. First, the mechanics of the negotiating table. On June 8th, and this is the number that frames everything, Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrsky announced that Ukraine had retaken roughly 600 square kilometers in total in 2026. An important note, and I say this explicitly because it's often misquoted, that number applies to the entire front, about 1,200 kilometers long, not to a single sector. It's the real ledger of the year. Russia in the red, Ukraine in the black. And now lay that real ledger next to the peace plan. According to NPR, the U.S. presented Ukraine with a 28-point plan. What does it demand above all concessions from Kiev? Ukraine is to cede land. It's to withdraw from part of the East. It's to shrink its army. And it's to renounce NATO membership in a legally binding way. See the problem. On the ground, Ukraine is winning. On paper, it's supposed to capitulate. These two things don't fit together unless someone at the table believes a map that isn't true. That's exactly what the painted map is for. A mediator who's convinced Russia is advancing unstoppably will tell Ukraine, take the deal now before you lose even more. The invented 900 square kilometers aren't a military tool. They're a diplomatic one. They're meant to manufacture fear where there's no basis for fear on the field. History knows this pattern. Negotiations rarely follow the sober situation on the ground. They follow the feeling of who currently has the upper hand. A side that appears to be advancing unstoppably can demand things at the table that its actual strength doesn't justify. Momentum is a currency, and momentum can be faked. Second, the mechanics of exhaustion. Why can't Russia simply advance for real instead of painting? Here, the facts speak for themselves. Pokrovsk is the answer. Russia threw months' enormous losses and its best reserves at this one city. It took it. And then there was nothing left to keep pushing. A victory that leaves the victor empty is in truth a defeat on a delay. That's the pattern of the whole war under a magnifying glass. Russia can still capture in spots, but it can no longer pay the price. Every meter costs more men and material than the meter is worth. And an army that buys every success until it's empty can eventually do only one thing: pretend. Run the numbers. An offensive devours soldiers' vehicles and ammunition faster than a country can replace them once the defense holds. Russia can plug the gaps in the field with new recruits for a while. But every hollow victory like Pokrovsk drains the reserves that would be needed for the next push. At some point, the army is too exhausted to cash in the map it's painting. Third, the mechanics of the sky. And here's the technical core that explains why 2026 is different from 2024. It used to be tanks and artillery that decided who advances. Now it's whoever controls the airspace over the first 10 kilometers of the front. Small FPV drones, remote-controlled craft barely bigger than a plate often built for a few $100s, have transformed the field. They hunt individual vehicles. They wait at intersections. They make every movement across open terrain deadly. And that's a one-way street in favor of the defender. Whoever wants to attack has to move across fields, across roads into the open. Whoever defends can wait. When Ukraine regained its drone superiority, the option of shoving mass across open ground without losing it vanished for Russia. The advance didn't suffocate on Ukrainian tanks. It suffocated in the sky. Picture it like a sniper covering every clearing. As long as he's circling up there, nobody dares cross the meadow. The ground no longer belongs to whoever has the most tanks, but to whoever rules the sky. Fourth, the mechanics of perception. And this is the most insidious of all. In a war fought also over screens and negotiating tables, a claim can become reality if enough people believe it. Perception becomes politics. Politics becomes borders on a map. Russia doesn't even have to actually break through the front. It only has to get the West to believe it's been broken. A headline about an invented advance works at the negotiating table like a real one. That's why Moscow exaggerates not out of vanity. It exaggerates on purpose as part of the war itself. And the deception is asymmetric. Moscow can simply assert a number in seconds. Refuting it costs weeks of patient work. Analyzing satellite images, geolocating videos, checking each settlement one by one. A lie is cheap, the truth is expensive. As long as enough people hear the lie before the truth catches up with it, the painted map has already done its work. Put the four mechanics together. Russia can't advance because the sky is working against it. It can't cover its exhaustion with real successes. It can't admit the standstill because a deadline runs out in June. So it paints a map bigger than its ground and carries it to a table where land is traded for land. That's not desperation. That's strategy. And it's dangerous because it might work if no one holds the stone map up beside it. Where does this lead? Three paths are conceivable. Path 1, the painted map, wins. The pressure of the June deadline takes hold, the invented gains manufacture enough fear, and Ukraine is pushed into a deal that doesn't reflect its real successes on the ground. Russia would get at the table what it couldn't conquer in the field. Path 2, the stone map wins. The real numbers prevail. Russia's losses, Ukraine's reconquests, the verdict of neutral institutes, and the negotiations align with what actually stands on the ground. Then Ukraine negotiates from the strength it fought for. Path 3, no deal at all by June. The deadline lapses, the war goes on, and both maps fight each other through another summer. And now I'll tell you what I'm betting on with the explicit emphasis that it's a bet, not a fact. I consider Path 2 or Path 3 more likely than Path 1. The reason is mechanical, not emotional. A painted map holds exactly as long as no one lays the real one beside it. But the real map is public. Institutes like the ISW publish their geolocated evidence. The gap between 572 and 900 square kilometers is already documented in black and white. A deception you can count out is a weak deception. There's one more reason for my bet. The turn of 2026 isn't a solo act by Ukrainian press offices. It's backed by several independent sources. Reuters, Al Jazeera, the ISW, the Sufan Center. A single report you can doubt. Four independent ones pointing in the same direction are hard to wave away. The stone map has many witnesses. The painted map has only one Moscow itself. But, and this is the exit condition that would prove me wrong, diplomacy doesn't always follow the facts. If the United States decides that a fast deal matters more than a just one, then it doesn't matter what the stone map shows. Then only what's said at the table counts. Should Ukraine be forced into heavy concessions despite its real gains on the ground, then the painted map will have won, and then I was wrong about this entire analysis. Keep that in mind as you listen to me. So, don't watch the headlines about individual villages. Watch the gap between the two maps. As long as it stays open and documented time is working for the truth. If it suddenly closes at the negotiating table without anything having changed on the ground, then you'll know the paint has won over the stone. Remember the two maps from the beginning. The one made of stone, the other made of paint. This entire war in 2026 comes down to a single question: which of the two maps will June believe Russia's offensive is dead? The numbers say so, not propaganda. But a dead offensive isn't the same as a lost war as long as you can turn a defeat into a painted victory. That's exactly what Moscow is trying to do right now, not on the field, on paper. And here's the sign to watch for if I'm right. Watch where the paint starts to peel. Watch the next ISW report the next map with geolocated evidence. If the gap between the real ground and the Russian claim keeps growing, then the deception breaks, and precisely when Moscow needs it most. The real question is bigger than this one front. It is, what's ultimately more powerful in this war, the ground under the boots or the story you tell about it? Share this video with someone who should see the real map and subscribe so you don't miss the next piece of the picture.